Welcome back. In this video, we'll be comparing the creation stories provided to us by Genesis with those provided to us by Hesiod's Theogony. And full disclosure here, we're really comparing apples and oranges when we compare Genesis with Theogony. And here's why. While Genesis is an integral part of the sacred text of Christians and Jews around the world and is considered the standard version of the creation for those traditions, Hesiod's Theogony is not considered to be a standard account, simply an account of the creation of the universe according to one guy, Hesiod, as he'd probably heard this story from his mom or his grandmother. And another thing I'd like to talk about before we get too much further into this is the use of the word God for our purposes. So when I'm talking about God, as God appears in Genesis, I will be referring to him as God with a capital G, as God is a proper noun. However, when I talk about the gods, or a god, as these gods might appear in Hesiod's Theogony, that's God with a little g, because these gods are simply a group of beings, and this refers to what they are, not their name. All right, let's jump right in. And let's talk about how things happen in Genesis. In Genesis 1, we learn that God creates the universe. A little story time. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and the darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. Well, that's quite a lot for our first day, isn't it? Here, what is there before there's God? It doesn't seem that there's anything before God. God is the beginning of the universe in this account. Also, take note of how God creates things. Let's have a look at day 2. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day." Again, God creates by saying things here. For those of you who are wondering what the firmament is, don't despair. A firmament is just a fancy word for the atmosphere. Let's move on to day 3. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called the seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after its kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and the herb yielding seed after its kind, so forth and so on. So here God brings plants onto the earth by first creating dry land through speech, and then calling the plants into being. On day 4, God will divide the light from the dark, and God will make day and night, and he will do so again through speech. On day 5, he'll create creatures of the sea and birds. And day 6, this is where we come in, he creates land animals, and he creates man and woman. And I'm going to skip over to Genesis 2 at this point, where we actually get a more detailed account of the creation of woman. "And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs, and he closed upon the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman, and brought her unto him. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she is taken out of man." So, the reason I call your attention to the fact that woman is created in this way is this. Every other place in Genesis has God creating things by saying them into being. Here, God seems to, through some sort of divine will, make Adam fall asleep. He pulls a rib from Adam's body, and then he fashions that into a woman, very much like a sculptor might put together a figure of a human being. And so God does things through physical force in Genesis 2. I find this to be intriguing because it is in variance with how he creates things earlier in this story. On day 7, God actually takes a break from what he's doing. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the 7th day from all the work which he had made. And God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it, because in it he had rested from all the work which God created and made. Now let's turn our attention to Hesiod's Theogony. This is a book that will start in much the same way. In the beginning there was only chaos, the abyss. Well, this sounds a bit like Genesis, doesn't it? There's only one thing in the beginning, and there are about to be more things. But I'll warn you, you'll need to go in with gun and camera, because this turns into an episode of the Maury Povich Show very quickly. Chaos is there in the beginning. Chaos is there alone. And the second thing that's in the universe is Gaia, which is Earth. And it doesn't say how Gaia proceeds from chaos. It's just, there's Gaia. And then there's Tartarus. And if you're wondering what Tartarus is a metal place that is underneath the underworld. And it'll later become a prison for the Titans. What else is there in the beginning? Well, there's Eros, which isn't love, it's more like lust. So, in the beginning, we have chaos, the earth, Tartarus, and lust. And this will inform how a lot of creation is going to happen in Hesiod's Theogony. Gaia will give birth to other beings right away, most notably the sky, Uranos. And then, and here's where it gets freaky, Gaia will make love to her son, Uranos, the sky, and they will have children together. However, Uranos hates his children. He's afraid of them. He refers to them as Titans, from the Greek verb titaino, which means to reach or to overreach, because he thinks that they strive or want too much. So, what does he do to the Titans as they're trying to be born? He shoves them back into their mother so that they can't be born. He keeps them from coming out and seeing the light of day. Well, this upsets the Titans, but it also upsets their mother. She is undergoing extreme pain. She's feeling all the pressure of her unborn children inside of her, and she feels like she has to do something about it. So, Gaia conspires with her son, Kronos. Kronos is an interesting one. His name means time, and Kronos is tricky. And I've often thought about this and why Hesiod might use the word tricky or crafty to refer to Kronos, like he does here several times in the text. Arch-deceiver is another term that comes up too. And here's the conclusion I have. Time is something that doesn't seem to happen quite the same speed for any two human beings, and before we know it, it's gone. And Hesiod's recognizing this by referring to Kronos, the force in the universe that has to do with time, as deceitful or tricky. What does Gaia do? What plan does she hatch with her son? She convinces her son that she needs to take a flint sickle and cut his father's genitals off. So that night, when Uranos is coming home from being out during the day, he crawls on top of his wife/mother, Gaia, to make love to her. And when he's about to do this, Kronos comes out of his mother and cuts off his father's genitals with an enormous sickle. And that's what you see here in this picture. Well, there are a couple of results of this that are immediate. The first is that the blood from the wound falls to the ground. And what gets born from that blood? The Furies and giants. What else gets born from this wound? Uranos' testicles fall into the sea, and they wash around on the sea, and this creates foam. And from that foam is born Aphrodite, whose name means foam-born. Kronos gets married to his sister Rhea, whose name means flow or ease. And together, they begin to give birth to a new race of beings, the so-called Olympian gods, because they'll come to live on Mount Olympus. Kronos, wisely perhaps, is afraid of his own children because he knows what he did to his own father. Afraid that he'll be overthrown, he eats each of his children as they're born. So Hestia, Hades, Poseidon, Hera, Demeter, etc., all get swallowed up by him in one gulp as they're being born from their mother's womb. Of course, this distresses Rhea, as you might imagine, and she feels like she's got to do something about it, just like her mother needed to do something about the way she was being held down by the man. So she approaches her own mother and looks for advice on this. And here's what they come up with. As Zeus is being born, Rhea does the following. She will feed a stone wrapped up in swaddling clothes to Kronos, and he'll think that he's eating his son. Meanwhile, they'll take Zeus away and leave him on Crete. And there on Crete, he'll grow up to be big and strong. Once Zeus is big enough, he'll trick his father into disgorging it, that is, vomiting it up. And he will leave it here by Mount Parnassus in Delphi. And this is where the Greeks believed it was. The stone that tricked Kronos. And it's huge. The thing must be 3 or 4 feet across. You can still go see it if you visit the treasury of the Athenians there at Delphi. Our struggle isn't over. Zeus wasn't done dealing with Kronos, and a war would break out between the so-called Olympian gods like Zeus and his brothers and sisters and his father. First, he had to trick his father into throwing up all his brothers and sisters. Remember, they are trapped inside his belly. He does that. Then he enlists the help of these giants called the Hundred-Handers and the so-called Cyclopes. These are Cyclops people who are capable of making lightning. And with the help of the Hundred-Handers and the Cyclopes who help him, Zeus is able to defeat his father and all of his father's generation. Zeus will imprison his own father in this place that's below the underworld, Tartarus. Well, it seems like trouble is over, right? It seems like all is right in the universe. But it's not so. Zeus still has to defeat one more creature, and that's Typhoeus, the Chaos Dragon. He uses his lightning to do this, and as a result, Zeus takes control. He wins over chaos, and he is totally in charge of the Olympians and thus the universe. What makes these stories different from each other? Well, there are the obvious elements of scandal and weirdness. But this is the main thing I want you to take away from this. Whereas creation happens in Genesis through speech, generally, in Hesiod's Theogony, creation happens mostly through sex. How is power handed over from one person to another? In Genesis, God gives man dominion over the beasts of the field and the plants. In the Theogony, it's taken. Power is taken by those who want it, and is taken through warfare, through imprisonment, through violence. Bodily harm comes to those who oppress others, and sons rise up against their fathers, almost as if it's a natural way of things.